Good evening, everyone. I am Kenny Coogan, the Education Coordinator for the Center for Inquiry. We have three programs, and one of them is TIES, the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science, which I'm going to be telling you about after this presentation. And we're very excited to have Dr. Michael Gurven here to talk about his new book. And he's kicking off our webinar series that happens during the school months in North America from September through May. And welcome, Michael, and thank you, everyone else who is attending this live.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all the teachers out there, and of your students if they're watching. Thanks to the organizers of this event. I'm really excited to present to this different audience. And if nothing else, show how social and life sciences working together can be a powerful combination for showing how evolution can apply to our everyday lives. First of all, I'm happy to announce that my book came out today. So consider this a gentle plug. I'll cover some tidbits in my talk today, and if anything I say piques your interest, please check it out. All right. Imagine a world where growing older didn't have to come with the horrors of chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. What would aging even look like in the absence of these diseases that are so common that many of us view them as basically synonymous with aging? It turns out this isn't really just a hypothetical question, but one that I've been privileged to study over the past 2 decades. First, some basics. Aging may mean a lot of things to you, and you'd be forgiven if you thought that aging only started at, say, age 60, or like the famous quote, aging starts always 15 years later than however old I am. Certainly, some of your students probably think that aging begins with those old people, in their 20s, and beyond that, it's just straight up ancient. But different aspects of aging can manifest over the life course. One way of thinking about aging, what it is, it's really just an accumulation of changes in our body over time that increases our vulnerability to disease and ultimately to death. And so, while its harshest features manifest late in life, there are certain changes in our body that are even evident in childhood. For example, the plaque that builds up in our arteries and narrows those arteries, those are both evident by age 10. In other words, the beginnings of one of the worst diseases that plagues us, atherosclerosis, actually has some of its beginnings in childhood. So aging doesn't start at any particular magic age. So we've yet to eliminate aging. And so the next best thing, and what many of you are probably interested in, is healthy aging. So over the past century, we've seen increases in our survival, right? We've cleaned up the water supply, built up public health infrastructure. We've acted upon our understanding of the germ theory of disease. So in other words, modern progress has been good to us. But at the same time, can we become victims of our success? So, a different, more gloomy spin about our modern progress asks, does our modern lifestyle and the urban environments we inhabit, and in many ways have created, does that somehow make us ill or sicker than we might be otherwise? In other words, is there an evolutionary mismatch between our genes, which evolved under conditions of the past, and the very different conditions we find ourselves in today? Now, you might be wondering, why even bother talking about our ancestral past? What does that really have to do with the present? So here's where I get to wear my anthropologist hat and remind everyone here, we've been hunter-gatherers and small-scale farmers for the vast majority of the 150 to 250,000 years that we've existed as one species, Homo sapiens. So to put that in perspective, if all of human existence were mapped across a single calendar year, everything about how we live our lives today would be squeezed into the last day of the last month of the year. The domestication of plants and animals, we'd only see that by about 6 a.m. And the growth of cities by about 3 p.m. And industrialization just shy of midnight at around 11:40 p.m. We've been hunter-gatherers and farmers for most of our species' existence, yet almost all studies of health and aging are in urban contexts of the global north, a small swath of humanity. And one strong message I hope to convey to you all is that there's a wealth of opportunity we're missing about health and aging for everyone if we limit ourselves to what's most familiar. So it's under a hunting and gathering lifestyle where many of our complex adaptations evolved, not just our physical bodies, but our brains, our emotions, even our social preferences. These here are the Ache of Paraguay, who were full-time hunter-gatherers up until the 1970s. I did my doctoral dissertation with them in the late 1990s, and spending time with the Ache, these are people whose life ways come the closest to how we used to live. It really was a life-changing experience. It got me hooked. I'd be lying if a part of me at the time didn't have this gut feeling that here among hunters and gatherers, unique light could be shown on the human condition that I wouldn't be able to get elsewhere. So it's important to remember, of course, that contemporary hunter-gatherers and farmers are not living relics. They're modern humans, just like you and me. But they offer the closest glimpse of what health and aging might have looked like in the past and can offer alternatives for how health and aging might look in the present. So these are indigenous populations living in the forests, the savannas, and the deserts of South America, of Africa, and Southeast Asia. Friends and colleagues of mine have worked with various of these groups, as you see here on the lower right, the Hadza, the Juhansi on the bottom, also the Hadza on the lower left, the Agta up at the top and the left, and the Ache, as I mentioned before. Okay, so let me give a quick summary of the rest of this talk in case you're like me and really impatient. So a big thesis is that non-industrialized populations provide a unique lens on aging and longevity, and that the potential for long life is built into our biology. So indeed, the human body is built to last at least about 7 decades, even among remote hunter-gatherers lacking health care. What's better for many of us is that we've extended that modal lifespan by about 1 to 2 decades in the modern world. A big difference between then and now is just that now many more of us are likely to reach that lifespan potential. What we've also learned from studying these populations is that some of the most devastating aging-related chronic diseases are preventable, and that a healthy lifespan or health span is possible without the need for regenerative medicine. Lastly, I think we can gain insights that help us rethink our so-called third age of elderhood, where a goal is to add life to years, not just years to life. Okay, so let's get right to busting the biggest myth in my talk today, namely that hunter-gatherers just didn't live very long. So didn't we only used to live to about age 30? This idea perfectly captured, right, philosopher Thomas Hobbes way back in the mid-17th century when he said that hunter-gatherer lives were nasty, brutish, and short. Now, it's true that in these populations, life expectancies are indeed short, but a life expectancy is not the same as lifespan. Life expectancy is an average lifespan in a population. So imagine the simplest case, a population that has just 2 people, Frank and Maria. Frank lives to age 1, Maria lives to age 99. So the average lifespan in this case, which is 1 plus 99 or 100 divided by 2, that's 50. So life expectancy in this case is just 50, even though half that population, namely Maria, lived to age 99. So for the same reason, life expectancy is low in hunter-gatherers because death rates are high during infancy and early childhood. Having studied the nuts and bolts of demography, namely birth and death rates, in many of these populations that lack all the modern amenities, we know that 20 to 50% don't make it long enough to celebrate their 15th birthday. But many people who make it to adulthood will survive to older age, including up to 7 decades, the title of my book. Old age is not just a recent phenomenon. This exists whether we're looking at hunter-gatherers, some of the oldest records in Europe, throughout the Roman ages, etc. So while conditions may be harsh by certain standards, many of the pervasive chronic diseases of aging are absent in these groups, and not just because they don't live long enough to experience them. So how do I know this? Well, for the past 26 years, I've been working with a group in the Bolivian Amazon called the Tsimane. These are forager farmers who inhabit the lowlands of central Bolivia. That means they hunt, they fish, they gather fruits and honey, and they farm, mostly plantains, corn, and rice. And by small scale society standards, they're actually pretty numerous. There's about 17,000 people living in over 90 villages. So what that means is if we're interested in understanding something about what happens to us after, say, age 40, there's over 2 to 3,000 people that you can study. This was one of the main reasons why I chose to work here. Plus, people were very friendly, welcoming, and also a lot of the villages lie along a gradient of acculturation. So not only is it interesting to compare a group like the Tsimane to, say, Americans, but variation amongst the Tsimane acts like a sort of natural experiment for seeing how changing life ways can affect health and aging. So in 2002, I started with, along with Hilly Kaplan, what's now called the Tsimane Health and Life History Project, designed to learn what health and aging were like in such a pre-industrial type setting in relation to the physical and social environment. So just to give you a quick visual glimpse of life in this kind of society, people make a living from the land. They farm it for plantains, for papaya, corn, manioc root, and this involves chopping down trees in the forest to make small fields. People are hunting in the forest, they're fishing in streams, lakes, and rivers, and families are relatively large. Average woman over the course of her reproductive life has about 9 births. Housing is mostly thatch huts, and there's no irrigation. There's no plumbing or water, there's no toilets, and there's no garbage pickup. Now, a project like this has grown over the years. It's been a binational effort between Bolivia and the United States, including a roving biomedical anthropology team that consists of Bolivian doctors that we employ to do medical checkups and provide free healthcare, chemists, and other lab techs whose point of care lab work aids in diagnoses, and most importantly, Tsimane, who are trained to be social scientists, and of course, vital logistics and office support locally. On the US side, I have 3 co-directors, and there's been many whose efforts have been vital, including postdocs and grad students, many of whom are now faculty themselves, and wonderful colleagues from a range of disciplines from cardiology, molecular biology, to neuropsychology and radiology. So over the years, we've tried to understand many aspects of physical health and condition in a very holistic but systematic way, spanning across many of the different systems in our body, from our muscles and our bones to our brain, our heart, our immune system, our metabolism, even our kidneys. And for each of these categories, we've collected many measures called biomarkers. Now, biomarkers are like little snapshots that help us evaluate the state and function of each system. So they can be molecular, they can be biological, they can be physical. They basically just indicate some type of physiological state. Many of these are used in clinical practice, right? They help your doctor identify whether you're at risk for certain diseases, to help diagnose a disease. And if you have that disease, maybe to assess its severity. And when you're receiving treatment or interventions, biomarkers can help monitor progress and recovery. So don't look too closely at this, but we've attempted to, over the years, to really understand these bodily systems as best as we can under field conditions. So some of these variables, these biomarkers, are going to be recognizable to you because you get them done at your annual checkup. So like your blood pressure, your cholesterol in your blood, your fasting blood sugar. Others might be less common, but are still going to be quite insightful. So in bold are just some of the measures that we have longitudinally, and that is more than one measure per person over time. Aging it's essentially a longitudinal process. So we really need to collect information on the same people over time to best characterize it. So aging certainly affects our body, but not necessarily at the same rate in all parts of our body. So some attempts to glean more global measures of aging exist, and we're in the middle of studying some of those as well. So just briefly, this includes measures of biological aging determined by analyzing what are called DNA methylation patterns. So these are changes in how genes are expressed that can occur without making changes to the DNA sequence itself. So this allows us to estimate biological age through what's called epigenetic age acceleration. We're also in the process of analyzing the whole genome, many diverse microbes in our gut, known as the microbiome, in addition to having actual clinical diagnoses from our project doctors who see the same people every couple of years. We also include many interviews and surveys designed to understand the larger context of health and aging, from how people make a living to how they share food and labor amongst other people in their networks, with whom they live, how they live, and broader aspects of mental health and well-being. So while by now, maybe you've got the message that we've collected a lot of data, but as an anthropologist, I like to tell stories, and each data point is a person. So these are real people. And a rarity of this kind of study in this setting is that, as I mentioned, like it's longitudinal. And so again, that means we follow the same people over time. And what better way to get us started than with a couple individual lives? So each person, like I said, has their own story. This woman was already a matriarch back in 2002 when I first met her. She had 7 adult children, 31 grandchildren at the time. By 2012, her husband had passed away, but she's thrived alongside her extended family. And this last photo on the right, I just took 2 years ago. And what's amazing is she looks wonderful. She looks almost as young as she did 20 years ago when I first met her. Her oldest son and her daughter-in-law just had recently moved back from a distant village where they were living at the time to take care of her after her husband had died. And she's surrounded not just by grandkids, but by many great-grandchildren as well. Now, this man, on the other hand, he was chief of his village, quiet, but had a good sense of humor and liked by everyone. His wife, unfortunately, passed away of uterine cancer shortly after the second photo was taken. And so he had a pretty rough road after that, but he bounced back. He remarried, he has a couple more kids. But you can see, from this last photo, just visually, it looks like, this kind of took a toll on him. All right. So with all that being said, what have we actually learned that might be useful or interesting to you? So I'm hopefully going to get through a couple findings here from our years of study. So first of all, the Tsimane have minimal atherosclerosis. Remember, this is the clogging and the narrowing of our arteries, which means essentially they have no heart disease. So our first clue about this was kind of indirect, focusing on the classic risk factors like blood pressure. So high blood pressure was rare. Blood pressure didn't really seem to increase much with age. And from electrocardiograms of almost 1,000 people over age 40, we also saw only one case of atrial fibrillation. So this is the most common arrhythmia of your heart, which can lead to clots, it can lead to stroke, it can lead to heart failure. We also saw no peripheral arterial disease, or PAD, that is no atherosclerosis in the limbs of the body, which is like a subclinical form of atherosclerosis. But our major insight was gained by going for a more direct measure, basically calcification or hardening of the arteries themselves that feed oxygen directly to your heart, your coronary arteries. Now, this was a big undertaking, transporting people from their remote villages to a distant town where there was a CT scanner. And from analysis of the CT images of the heart, we found basically the lowest levels of coronary artery calcification, or CAC, ever reported. Basically, 85% of adults over age 40 had no calcified plaques whatsoever. Now, this is critical because wherever it's found, CAC is an accurate predictor of the heart events, heart attacks, strokes. One way of gauging how healthy their coronaries were is to talk about their arterial age. So this is in reference to the CAC levels we observe in Americans of the same chronological age. And by that metric, Tsimane have arteries that are about 2 decades younger than their years. That's amazing. More recently, we've also been looking at the elasticity or the stiffness of arteries. And again, this is another major risk factor for heart disease. And again, we found that Tsimane have very elastic arteries, more so than in other populations with comparable data. So the big question, of course, is how? How do groups like the Tsimane avoid these kinds of diseases? My team and I have tried to figure this out. On the dietary side, it's not a paleo meat only diet. In fact, 2/3 of what people eat actually comes from carbohydrates from their fields, but many of those carbs are complex. They're rich in fiber. They eat less fat and very little saturated fat. And a critical element of their diet is that they don't eat processed foods. Now, some people do grow their own tobacco, but compared to many countries, cigarette smoking is just not that common. Now, what is common though is physical activity, and not from deliberate exercise or leisure activities, or even like myself, the weekend warrior going on a hike but still sitting at my desk all week variety. So how do we know this? We from accelerometers that Tsimane wore on their waists and their wrists, we know that they average about 17,000 steps per day. So even adults over age 60 are getting close to 15,000 steps per day. So that's 2 to 3 times more than your average American is getting. So the bottom line, people are physically active from their daily life. But what's instructive here and hopeful is it's not that vigorous activity is what people are doing. People aren't spending all their time chasing bears down the highway. A lot of it is light to moderate activity. So people just don't spend that much time being sedentary. So these three aspects alone might help us explain much of the healthy hearts of groups like the Tsimane. The fact that they have low bad, or LDL cholesterols, they have low blood pressure, they have low morning blood sugar, basically meaning very little diabetes, and very little obesity, based on body mass index. Now, there are other factors at play here, though, and minimal industrial air pollutants is one thing, but also potential protective effects of intestinal worms. Now, this is the ick part of our work, but it's a part of the work that's been the most surprising and I would argue the most novel. Because yes, it's true that most infections are bad, they harm our health. And from our work and that of others, worms or helminths as they're called, the worms in our intestines, they're largely tolerated in our bodies. And while they can disrupt growth early in life, they can lead to anemia in some cases, but we found that they also help improve Tsimane cardiovascular risk factors. Basically, they lead to lower cholesterol levels, lower blood sugar, and they help regulate immune functioning by dampening inflammation. So in combination, all these factors lead to having a healthy heart. Basically, no or minimal CAC, again, the coronary artery calcification throughout most of life. Next, people like the Tsimane not only have healthy hearts, but they have healthy brains. They show slower brain aging. So here, this is Tsimane brain volume in red on the y-axis, by age on the x-axis, comparing to two European and American samples using similar methods, and the rate of brain atrophy is lower amongst the Tsimane compared to age-matched Europeans and Americans. Tsimane also show low rates of dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease. So this shows that basically under 2% of Tsimane over the age of 60 or 65 were diagnosed with dementia. It's at least double, if not 3 to 6 times more prevalent in other populations. And just as an aside, you might be wondering, how the heck do you diagnose something like that in sort of a non-industrial, non-literate context? It's not very easy, but with a lot of expert collaborators, basically we had a big battery of neurological tests, cognitive memory tests, interviews with family members, all adapted to the local Tsimane culture and language, done in collaboration with folks at the University of Southern California, whose daily bread and butter is managing and diagnosing dementia cases. So we're pretty confident about those findings. So, all right, we've seen so far that Tsimane have healthy hearts, healthy brains, but let's zoom out to a broader level of just biological age. Is it the case that Tsimane are really healthier than their age-matched American peers? So one measure shown here is a composite of many of those types of biomarkers that I showed you earlier on. So the idea is that instead of just assessing, one or two, of your favorite biomarkers, imagine taking the information from like 40 biomarkers to see if their levels and the way that they associate with each other are changing with age, especially in relation to what that looks like in healthy people. And so this gives us a sense of a key aspect of aging, what's been called physiological dysregulation. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying things fall apart. So our preliminary work here seems to show that this dysregulation increases with age among women and men, and it does so similarly as it does in Canadians and Europeans, where there's similar data for comparison. Now, I mentioned epigenetic age before as another metric of biological age, and here our initial work is a little bit less clear. So by one holistic metric here of epigenetic age, the Tsimane seem to be younger than their US whites and Hispanics. But by another metric that mostly corresponds to something that we can think of as immune system age, the Tsimane are older than their years. So we have a much bigger sample now, and we'll be able to learn more soon. But this general pattern seems to jive a little bit with just observations that on one level, the Tsimane adults, they can walk through the tangled forest for 10 miles. They can chop trees for hours. But at the same time, they're at greater risk of dying from a variety of infections, including pneumonias, tuberculosis, and other respiratory ailments. So taking this together, we've learned some exciting things, but it's still a work in progress. And we're trying to better understand the separate and additive effects of these major factors from diet, physical activity, infection, genetics, the gut microbiome, but also social connections, which I'll talk about in a second here. And we're trying to understand their effects on both aging writ large and those specific diseases of aging, which seem to operate through pathways involving the immune system, metabolism, and our vascular system. All right. Are there more take-home messages that hit closer to home? So many often ask me, how can we gain extra years of good life? So first of all, some of the same things that make the Tsimane healthy are what make us live longer. But now I think we can have a greater appreciation for why. So in a recent study analyzing the lifespan of almost 1 million US veterans tracked over 2 decades, 8 habits were found that had the largest effect on adding extra years to life. First of all, physical activity had the biggest effect, increasing survival by 46%. Next, stay away from opioids, always good advice. Don't smoke. Also, folks who manage stress well, those with a healthy, whole food, kind of more plant-based diet, no regular binge drinking, good night's sleep, and positive social relationships also live longer. So, taken together, if you're 40 years old and went from having none of those habits to adopting all 8 of them, you would gain about 2 to 2.5 more decades of life. This gain is less if you're already doing some of these, but even if you were doing half, you'd still gain about a decade from doing the rest. And it's true, you can see from those declining curves, the benefits diminish if you start them at later ages, but it's never too late to start. Going from doing none of those to even just 4, even at age 80, will give you about 4 extra years of life. So the key then is not to think of each of these like medications or a treatment for longer life, but rather to adopt these as part of a lifestyle so they become habits. Remember, Tsimane don't exercise. They walk, they move their bodies to get food and to socialize. All right, so that all speaks to adding more years to life. What about that final part about adding life to years? And that's what I'm currently working on. I'm interested in the quality of later years. Are people happy? Do they feel a sense of belonging, of being connected to others in their families, in their communities? The short answer is yes. And despite high levels of social embeddedness, do we also see evidence of social isolation and loneliness? Short answer there, yes, but less so in the US. Do people feel that their lives have meaning and purpose? Again, yes. Now, that modernizing influences like schools, smartphones, cell reception, markets, logging, colonizing neighbors, all that's increasing. How is that going to affect the health and well-being of elders in these types of settings? So over the past few years, my team and I have conducted a lot of interviews, focus groups, and behavioral observation throughout the day to get a good sense about all these things that hopefully maybe next time I talk to you, I'll have a deeper sense of. But one thing I've learned that's clear, living in multi-generational communities surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors is key to people's well-being and their physical health, not just of elders, but of children and teenagers also. There's no notion of formal retirement at age 65 or at any other age for that matter. People continue working to the extent that they can, but they also shift how they spend their time, taking on other important roles, be it as educators, babysitters, storytellers, which remember, in the absence of books, TV, and ChatGPT, is priceless. They're also conflict mediators, leaders, and cultural experts with a lifetime of experience and wisdom. Which leads me to my final point, and one developed at length in my book. It's true that we're getting older and fewer people are having babies, so a larger share of the US population is old and getting older. This demographic shift, it's usually portrayed as a looming disaster, the silver tsunami, but I'd like to flip that narrative. The vast majority of the older population isn't going to be in their frail 90s. Most will be in what's called the young old years, right? People in their 60s and 70s. And these elders represent opportunity that's not being harnessed, but was harnessed during much of our evolutionary history and in groups just like the Tsimane. I mentioned no official retirement, people continuing to work into later years, but I'm talking more generally about connecting the generations in a more comprehensive way for the benefit of everyone, young and old. Doing so is going to require lots of changes, lots of conversations, from how younger folks think about their elders to fostering public spaces where intergenerational learning and socializing is routine. But if these recent books, and hopefully mine, are an indication, we're going to see many more conversations about how to accomplish this. So this result can be a win-win for everyone, rather than thinking it as a zero-sum situation where elders can only benefit at the expense of the young. All right, thank you so much for your attention. I have a website there if you'd like to see some of the original publications, but please check out the book. Thank you so much again for your time and attention.
All right, thank you so much, Michael, for an excellent presentation. I went for a 2.5 mile walk today, so I hope that has improved my longevity. And there is very little stress involved. So, yes, I forgot to mention that today Michael's book was published by Princeton University Press, so we are honored to have him present for TIES. TIES has been around for just over 10 years, and we've been doing webinars for many of them through the school year where we promote evolution and teachers, helping teachers. My name is Kenny Coogan. I am the CFI Education Coordinator, and TIES is just one of the programs that I'm going to tell you about. But first, I wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow we have another webinar, and then next Tuesday we have another webinar because we are kicking off our webinar series for the school year of 2025 to 2026. You can learn more about TIES by going to tieseducation.org. All of our resources are free. We are very active on Facebook. We like to share evolution news, one post a day. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you will see that we have a nice curated playlist. So we have human evolution, we have natural selection, we have teacher tips, and then we publish all of our webinars there. Like I mentioned, we've been around for 10 years and we have presented around 350 in-person workshops in all 50 states. If you go to our website, you will be able to watch a little 1 hour mini session of our in-person workshops, but you also get access to all of the free resources, including a full unit for middle school and high school science teachers for evolution. You'll see all of our hands-on activities, our bell ringers, videos, online games, lots of resources, and everything is free, 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 free. The only thing that we charge is for our book because we have to pay the publisher to print the book. But right now, for the start of the school year, we're having a sale, a buy one, get one free sale. So if you go to tieseducation.org, right now you can get yourself a copy of the book and then you can gift it to your uh, school's library or you can gift it to your favorite science teacher. So that's ties. Of course, you can really dig deep because we have so many resources. But another program under the Center for Inquiry is Science Saves. And science touches all of us from vaccines that save to discoveries that shape our world. And we encourage teachers and all disciplines to join Science Saves. And we encourage all citizens to join Science Saves in celebrating National Science Appreciation Day and the people whose work transforms lives. You can get involved by signing the petition encouraging high school seniors to enter our $10,000 scholarship. That's first prize. We also have second prize, third, fourth, fifth prizes. And we've been doing that for about 5 years. And we encourage you to explore our free NGSS aligned resources. And like I didn't mention, TIES is also all science aligned, and it meets or exceeds every state's evolution standards. Now, for Science Saves, behind every breakthrough is a personal story. If you visit sciencesaves.org, you will find powerful examples of how science has saved and improved the lives of many people. We are promoting Science Saves, and you can go to the website to see what states are celebrating. And when you go to our website, you will see that we have K through 12 resources, and they are aligned for science, math, language arts, inspiring curiosity, critical thinking, and discovery in every classroom. The third program I want to tell you about is Generation Skeptics. The aim of this program is to develop and foster an understanding of the world through inquiry-based learning, and we provide material to complement and enhance existing science and educational programs. And all of these lessons also have teacher lessons, plans that you can submit, and everything is editable. So it's in Word or PowerPoint. If you have any questions, you can email me or Bertha, the Director of Education for CFI. Princeton University Press is proud to support Michael, and they've been great partners for the Center for Inquiry for many, many years. And at the very bottom, if you go to Princeton University Press and then you type in that coupon code, you will get 30% off the brand new book. And like I mentioned, Princeton University Press has been long partners. And because of that, they are gifting 3 of these brand new books to teachers who attended this workshop, this webinar live. And the winners of today are Sharon B., John M., and Brian E. And if you have not done so already, please email me or please send me a message of your address. And then Princeton University Press is going to send you those books directly to your house. Okay, Michael, I'm going to read you some questions so people on YouTube know what we're talking about. Bertha, the Director of Education, says, congratulations on your book. And we would like to know if you believe in blue zones and what do you know about blue zones for
Right.
longevity?
Yes. Actually, friends with Dan Buettner, of Blue Zones fame. And so, yeah, I've known about this for a while. And I think it's not, yes, there are places around the world where there's sort of pockets of people, but it's not like they have magic genes and it only exists in this one place. Most of the principles, so I guess there's two versions of that. One where there people who are relatively long-lived and are reasonably healthy in their late ages, versus like where are the most centenarians living. And it's about the centenarians and the super centenarians where things get a little bit more controversial because there wasn't a whole lot of good record keeping in lots of other places. And yes, it's true that there's incentives for having the most centenarians in your population and you can get social security benefits and blah, blah, blah. So there's been a little bit of controversy back and forth about some of those numbers, but it's not very controversial that there's relatively long-lived and healthy people living in the 6 or 7 places that have been named as blue zones. And I think, but some of the differences are quantitative, right? So yeah, there's blue zone in Icaria in Greece and Sardinia, in Italy, but you see healthy people kind of in every population as a subset. So I do think there's a logic to what constitutes the blue zones, and it's some of the same principles that I talked about as affecting in that study of the U.S. veterans, that it's you see a sort of a conglomeration of all of these factors that are protective, where those tend to be sort of culturally salient. So it's the easiest thing to do. That's where people tend to be the most long-lived, right? When you have to do those 8 things because you just have superhuman willpower, that's going to be really hard to kind of manifest at a population level. So part of the blue zone idea, and what I really like is these blue zone communities. It's a community-based effort for trying to get buy-in from all levels of government, schools, transportation, to structure communities in ways that the easiest option is the healthier option.
I
So
think
that,
I heard something about like a Midwestern city implementing like the blue zone ideas, and then their population started getting very healthy.
yeah, so as far as prevention goes and financial benefits, yeah, in Minnesota, this is where it was first kind of launched, and you saw a noticeable reduction in body mass index and blood sugar in ways that are going to be very cost saving down the road with less diabetes and obesity related chronic diseases down the road.
Near the end of your presentation, you mentioned how your community that you were studying didn't really talk about retirement, and somebody commented that it was also like a blue zone aspect for the Japanese population, that they didn't have a word for retirement and that they kept like serving their younger generations.
Exactly. This is very recent, this notion that I worked, now I'm done. Like I'm retiring. And in the worst case, I'm disassociating myself, right? I'm checking out. And, in the worst case, I'm only going to interact with other people of my similar age. And, maybe I'm going to spend my time vacationing, if you're healthy. And, not to say that you shouldn't enjoy those later years, but the notion that it's like this sort of like permanent vacation is very novel and very new. And in many ways, there's a pushback against that, right? Not that we want to work ourselves to the bone past age 65, but that, what could work look like continuing on? So some of us might love our jobs and do want to continue on in whatever job they have beyond age 65. Maybe they want to reduce or shift some of their responsibilities, but let's make room for that, right? Some folks might want to completely shift what they were doing and recapture some of those dreams, things they gave up early in life. So you see all these encore careers, these second, third wave of careers that people want to embark. And this shouldn't just be a luxury thing if you're wealthy that you're volunteering, but we should find ways that people can earn livings from doing these kinds of things. So just that kind of involvement, work being a big kind of part of that, but more engagement within the community. It's all That's all part of what retirement could look like. And like I mentioned, not only is it going to make, and all the studies where these movements have been done, where there's been initiatives, it not only makes the older people happier, it actually makes them healthier too, because it's reducing their stress. They're encouraged and motivated to do health-related behaviors because they want to extend their years of healthy living. And it makes the people that they're helping and interacting and associating with happier and healthier as well. So it's a win-win.
So earlier you mentioned like health related behavior, and it's really good when it's easy, or like being healthy is easy, because somebody also mentioned, Ryan said that I heard that once McDonald's was built in like that blue zone in Japan, the longevity started to go down. Like once
Yeah.
fast food started being easy.
That- Now that's true, and well, but again, depending on your perspective, Japan still has higher life expectancy than we do, at at most ages, and so even with a McDonald's in Japan, people are still living reasonably healthy lives, and but maybe a little bit less healthier than they were before that, or folks in Okinawa. And this is where, we didn't, this is, you're all teachers of evolution, right? And, one important lesson, of course, we didn't evolve to just live the longest life possible, right? Biological fitness is really, it's about living, but it's also surviving, but it's also about reproduction, fertility, fitness. And it's a combination of those things. And sometimes the things that might make us happier and improve our reproductive fitness aren't always the same things that make us live long, super healthy lives. And so, finding those kinds of balance, that kind of trade-off, how do you capture the benefits of modernization with minimizing the cost? So, I mean, if one must go to McDonald's, there are somewhat healthier options even at McDonald's, right? And so, I have a kind of perspective that tries to be a little bit more practical. If you try to like change 50 different things in your life, chances are you're not going to end up doing any of them. And so, try to, do the things that are more attainable. So if you love McDonald's every day, maybe try limiting it to once a week and then maybe reducing that to once a month. And so doing things that are going to be a bit more obtainable in your daily lives. But just because there is a McDonald's, it doesn't necessarily mean that like that old movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. There's a Coke bottle that falls from the sky. And as soon as like that Coke bottle, like people discover Coke, these hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari savannas, all of a sudden their lives are completely ruined. And that's just not the case. So, someone had mentioned and asked, actually kind of covering two questions, sort of is life in Japan, health ruined with McDonald's? Is there this decline? I saw John Mead ask the question about assimilation with Western culture. And it is true that with more of a Western diet and lifestyle, you do see sort of a decline in health, in chronic disease health. But at the same time, there's differences in high income countries, right? Survival is higher in Northern Europe and good chunks of Western Europe, and they're equally Western as us. So there is something more specific about Americanized, sloth slash ultra processed diets that are making more of a difference. And so while you do see that, you do see a bit of that decline. But I do want to mention, even though it's important to repeat, groups like the Tsimane that don't have heart disease, don't have dementia, also die at higher rates than we do at all ages. So even some of our fast food is serving a purpose, right? We're obtaining calories at low cost, but and it's helping us live into our through our 70s. But now we're living in our 70s and our health is being more compromised at those ages. Whereas the Tsimane and other kinds of groups, if they make it to those later ages, they tend to be relatively healthy until close to the end, but they're not going to be living, I've never heard of a hunter-gatherer living into their hundreds, for example. Now, it's also a numbers game. There haven't been millions and millions of people, hunter-gatherers who've been studied. So, sometimes it's a numbers game to get a Jean Calment who can live to 120 years.
All right, very good. So in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about like average populations and how to calculate kind of longevity. And superstar teacher John Mead
Uh-huh.
says, I talk with my middle schoolers about the burst in Western life expectancy, and a big part of that is the improved youth survival. How has youth survival changed in your experience with more isolated populations? And I'll also add that our one program, Science Saves, we have an original life expectancy video about how youth survival has changed for the past 200 years based on vaccines, medicine, things like that.
Yeah, no, that's great and a great question. Because I would say for most of our evolutionary history, when people think about death and dying, it's an issue about childhood, right? We tend to think of, reaching those later years and dying in old age. And in some ways, yeah, that is a luxury that now many of us are much more likely to reach it to those late ages. And so it really is that the highest mortality rates are in those earlier years. So much so that not only in the Tsimane, but in a lot of cultures, uh, infants aren't even given a name until a year or two in. And, there's various reasons for that. But, my personal idea, it's like you almost don't want to completely personalize and humanize an infant because there's such a strong chance that that baby might not make it through its first year of life. And so, uh, because mortality rates are so much higher early in life, and a lot of it is due to accidents and infectious disease, those are the things that have been changing the most rapidly over historical time throughout, pretty much everywhere. It's been looked at. Now, what's interesting is that in the Tsimane, I think that's now the case. But actually, I looked at this from the period of the 1950s up until like the early 2000s. The relatively speaking, mortality rate was actually dropping more in adulthood than it was in early life. And I think some of that also just goes to cultural beliefs about, what are things that you think you can actually change? And a lot of times when I think infant and child death was so common that people didn't think that going to the doctor or going to a hospital was going to make much difference. Whereas they might have thought differently about that in adulthood. So I think people were less likely to use the available health services that there was. Uh, and so we didn't see that much of a change in infant survival from the 50s up until the early 2000s. But that's shifted since then. And it comes through not just changes in the technology and healthcare access, but a change in the understanding of what you can actually do to make a difference. I do think, in high mortality settings, like in the Tsimane environment, there is a sort of fatalism where you feel like no matter what you do, maybe if you make a big effort, you'll be saved today, but then something might happen tomorrow. And so with limited resources, people don't tend to do the sort of healthy, uh, health promoting kind of thing that you would expect people to do, if that was their only goal in life. So, thankfully, we are seeing drops in mortality in early life now in groups like the Tsimane as well.
All right, because of time, we have one more question. It's from Bertha. Are you worried about social media isolating people in our society and keeping them from being active? And then she adds, social media also keeps people in their age bubbles, less intergenerational connections.
Whew, that's a that's a big question.
Can I add that I learned that China, who invented TikTok, bans the amount of time that Chinese people are allowed to be on TikTok
Yeah,
because they don't want them to be like not working,
yeah.
sedentary.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And the quick answer is yes. I mean, I have a seventh grader and a fourth grader, and this is like I struggle with this every day. When to give the phone and what parental controls and blah blah blah. And no matter what I do, it's all about their friends. And yeah, it's definitely an issue. And on so many levels, from the attracting likes aspect of social media to the am I sitting around plugging away on my phone versus being actually interacting in person and being physically active. And this is where I just think, yeah, we're going to have to get creative. There are many ways that technology and apps can help promote physical activity. And I think we're seeing some of that. And in certain places like Singapore are very proactive in doing that. As well as like health monitoring apps and tools that, in the world of personalized medicine, we can see some improvements that apps and phones can help with, and sort of connecting to emergencies, when there's emergencies and things like that. Um, but I do think, and I can quickly say in groups like the Tsimane, where now people went from having no phones at all, like landlines, much less flip phones. And now all of a sudden there's towers and now there's cheap made in China cell phones, smartphones. And so things are changing. I had Chimane who are, I'm networked with on WhatsApp and Facebook. And I have to say, initially though, it seems to be a benefit. People are using this when there's health emergencies and trying to connect they're connecting with kin who live in a completely different part of the territory, children that they haven't seen in a while because they moved far away. So I think people are seeing that as a net benefit. I'm starting to see, I just came back a couple weeks ago, and yeah, there was a little bit of, people staring into the glow of their phone instead of the fire and the hearth. And so I do worry about what that entails for indigenous populations, living that were living a more traditional life. Again, same thing. How do we harness the benefits of the new phone technology and minimize those costs? And certainly for us, how do we harness those benefits uh, without just having to like lock in these controls that, give us an electric shock once we meet past our 30-minute, on doom scrolling on social media. But great question, hard to answer.
Yeah.
Uh, Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for an excellent presentation. And we're excited to share this with our teacher core. And Michael's new book, 7 Decades, How We Evolved to Live Longer, is out now. And you can get the link by going to Princeton University Press, or you could also get the link by going to tieseducation.org. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it and all your great questions. And teachers, you are in the trenches. I love you all. I come from many relatives who are teachers. You're underappreciated and underpaid, but you're the ones that make the big difference. Thank you.